So, now it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Muncke, that is working at the Food Packaging Forum in Switzerland. We met, I think, more than 10 years ago at a Gordon Research Conference on endocrine disruption. But so since this moment, she is working with glass and to also show that you have multiple things that we don't know about the polymers. And so she will talk today about the food containers and the chemicals that are in the contact of food. We will have a follow-up discussion tomorrow morning with that. And Jane is going to present also tomorrow morning the Plastique project. It was supposed to be Liza Zimmerman, but finally Lisa is not here and Jane is here, and Lisa is working with Jane now, so it was better like that. So thanks, Jane, for being there. And okay, just put your slides on. Yeah, thanks.
So maybe I can start.
Yeah,
thank you so much for the kind introduction. So yeah, as Jean-Baptiste said, I'm working at the Food Packaging Forum. Thank you very much, in Zurich, in Swiss. And I apologize for having a très mauvais français, so I have to stick to English. Jean-Baptiste asked me to speak a bit about the chemicals in food packaging. But just to start us off and to remind us why we're all here, we really only have one planet. It's a beautiful planet, but we're not doing very well with reducing our impacts on the environment. And I'm a mother. Some of these are my children, not all of them, and I'm very, very worried for the future that we are leaving for these human beings and also for many other creatures. So we have a huge responsibility and a big obligation to do something about this. And I really appeal to you to do whatever you can as scientists, as citizens, as human beings in your daily lives. We're all very much aware of this issue. That's why we're here today. I guess that's our common denominator. This is awful and we want to stop this. And food packaging is important when we talk about plastic pollution, because actually a lot of the littered plastic, the plastic pollution, comes from food packaging. When we look at beach cleanups and so on, it's the top littered, it's in the top 10. Cigarette butts a bit more, but food packaging, takeaway containers, convenience packaging. It's really, really important. And it's not necessary, we don't need that. But what people talk less about are these chemicals. And the reason why we should speak more about chemicals, we touched upon it already in the presentations from Selina and also Fabienne, is that chemicals migrate from food contact materials into foodstuffs. So this is not a very sophisticated graph, but just to give you the picture, we heard it a few times already, the chemicals that plastics and other materials are made of, under certain conditions, they can transfer from the food packaging into the foodstuff. It doesn't matter if the food is dry or liquid. It doesn't matter if it's got fat content or not, if it's acidic or not. This process happens. And this has been studied for over 50 years. So this is known. This is a fact. There's nothing mysterious about this. Just quickly, what influences this issue of migration? It's basically 4 things, maybe 5. Now that we heard about the reasons why microplastics can be generated. But it's heat. So if you have high temperature, if you put hot food stuff into plastic, if you heat food in plastic, you will get much higher migration. And you also can generate nano and microplastics, by the way. With heat. After long contact times, if you store foodstuffs for a long time, like 2-3 years, think about flour, think about polenta or rice, foods that have very specific surface areas, high specific surface areas, you will get much, much more migration. of course, the chemistry matters. So what's the chemistry of your packaging material? What's the chemistry of your foodstuff? If you have high fat content, already starting with about 25% fat content in your foodstuff, you get a very, very rapid and almost complete transfer of anything that is lipophilic. Acidity matters. Think of tomato sauce, sodas. Very low pH, you get a transfer of chemicals into low pH foodstuffs, a higher transfer. And then the last one is maybe also a bit surprising. The size of your serving matters, because there's a relationship, between the surface area of your packaging and the volume of food. And so if you have 1 liter jus d'orange or du lait or whatever in a beverage carton, and you shrink it down to 250 milliliters, the ratio of your surface area to volume of the foodstuff increases. So in smaller serving sizes, you can get proportionally higher migration. And that worries me, especially when we think about children. And they're more sensitive to chemicals, and then if we give them these specially marketed for kids serving sizes, they will get even more chemicals. So maybe just a quick comment in case you're wondering, why are we concerned about these chemicals? We've known it for 50 years, and we're all still alive, and people are getting older and so on. Yes, people are getting older, but people also are getting sicker. And this is just a snapshot of chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases, which are increasing globally in all countries of the world. It's not just the developed world, also in low and middle income countries. And these diseases are multifactorial. So there can be many, many different reasons why people get sick. It can be genetics. But increasingly, it's becoming clear that there's a large responsibility also due to environmental lifestyle factors. And we also know that chemicals can contribute to these diseases. And we can't do much about genetics. It's hard to do something effective about air pollution and the environment, though we have to try. But what we can do is we can try to reduce the exposure to hazardous chemicals if they're used knowingly and intentionally. And that's where the food packaging comes in. So what are the health impacts of chemicals from food packaging? And before I dive a little bit more into that, I just want to make very clear that food packaging matters, right? I'm not saying here we have to get rid of food packaging. That would be crazy and delusional. We all know that food packaging protects foodstuff and it prevents food waste. And it's a shout out to all the French here. You have a wonderful heritage. Nicolas Appert, actually, Frenchman in the 19th century, is probably the one who invented modern food packaging. So that was a big disruption in the food system at the time. It made humanity independent of seasons, harvesting seasons. It allowed us to store food. And for us, it's quite normal now, this abundance of food everywhere. We walk into a supermarket, we almost have too much food, right? But 150, 200 years ago, people were starving, and that was a big breakthrough to have food packaging. So I think it's not something to be downplayed. Of course, now food packaging has evolved. It's much more than just a means to preserve food. It enables globalized food production and enables highly, highly profitable globalized food models. And the retail business models, supermarkets, and so on, deliveries. It also, I say it supports the effective marketing and communication. Of course, it also overstimulates consumption quite a bit. And there also is, I want to also make that clear, there is a close relationship between modern food packaging and ultra-processed foods, which also we know are to blame for a lot of health issues. So, having said that, most food packaging is plastic, or if it's not plastic directly, it has a plastic or a synthetic plastic-like layer in direct contact with food. So again, think about that beverage carton, your orange juice, jus d'orange, le lait, whatever. The layer on the inside is plastic. Beverage cans, beer, whatever. The layer on the inside, it's a varnish, it's a coating, it's synthetic chemistry at least, if it's not plastic, and so on. Also, the closures on glass jars have a plastic liner, usually. So the key terms when we talk about this topic is the food contact article, which would be your finished packaging. So it's like a yogurt cup in this example. This innocent little yogurt cup is actually a highly engineered product. It's really complicated. It can consist of up to 7 different types of materials. You've got your cup, you've got an aluminum lid, it's coated, there's printing inks on there, there's adhesives to close everything on, maybe you've got a paper label or something. This is very, very highly engineered and designed to work in high throughput, globalized logistics. What we're interested in are these, what we call food contact chemicals. This is not an official term. This is a term that we created at Food Packaging Forum because we just felt we just wanted to have a term to describe what we're working with, which is any and all chemicals that can be present in a finished food contact article. So it doesn't matter if they were intentionally used to make the materials, to make the finished article, or whether they're present as NIAS, as these non-intentionally added substances. In Europe, we have a legal definition of the safety, which is that materials and articles shall be manufactured so that under normal or foreseeable conditions of use, they do not transfer their constituents to food in quantities which could endanger human health. So here you see they acknowledge that these products transfer their constituents, right? That's the migration. So this is known. There's no doubt about that. But what they're interested in are these quantities. And we'll get back to that in a sec. But maybe first let's have a look at what the types of chemicals are. And we had a few mentionings of this already today. So you've got these intentionally used substances, the monomers, the catalysts, production aids, additives, pigments. And when we started diving into this work at the Food Packaging Forum, we put together this database which contains over 12,000 chemicals that we found globally on different regulatory inventories or in industry lists, chemicals that are used to manufacture food contact materials, all types of materials, not just plastic, everything. So that's a resource that you're welcome to use. We call it the FCCDB, the Food Contact Chemicals Database. And we also, in this publication, we also came up with so this was actually led by our colleague, also an ecotoxicologist, Dr. Ksenia Grohl, who's now at Avec. And together with Ksenia, we put together a kind of ranking, how to identify the most hazardous chemicals. But what we also then discovered was that there are many, many data gaps. So of these more than 12,000 chemicals, we actually don't have any publicly available hazard information, or we didn't at the time, for 3,500 chemicals, which I find quite interesting. I mean, if you think about it, these are chemicals that are intentionally used to make food packaging, and there's no hazard information. No one's tested these. They're out on the market, probably. So then we said, okay, what about the non-intentionally added substances? And these are the ones that also have been mentioned already. These are reaction byproducts. There's always a discussion about whether oligomers are counted as NIAS or not. I think the academics tend to count them as NIAS, the industry doesn't. Impurities, so that's really an important one. When you go out and buy a monomer, because you want to make plastic, excuse me, it's my throat lozenge. No, I'm good, thanks. When you go out and buy a monomer because you want to make plastics, you will get whatever is the best, the cheapest available product on the market. And this is not pharmaceutical grade purity of chemicals, right? This is 90% purity, maybe 80% purity, depending on the price, depending on your technical needs. So if it's 90% purity, there's 10% of something else in that batch of monomer, which you are reacting to make a polymer, which becomes your plastic material. And those 10% of impurities, they can also react, you know, because polymerization is a very aggressive chemical process. And so you get the reaction products of your impurity, you get the breakdown products of your impurity, and so on. All of that will also be in the finished plastic. I think that's something that is given a bit too little attention. Then, of course, the degradation products, when your additives degrade because they're fulfilling their function as UV stabilizers, antioxidants, and so on. And then, last but not least, the contaminants. DEET, is it a contaminant or not? We don't know. But recycling of plastic, we know, can lead to increased levels of contaminants in the plastic. So again, we put together a database, and this one was actually even more complicated than the first one. It's nice when you can just talk about this after the fact, but we worked for a few years on this one. Here we did a systematic evidence map, searching for empirical lab-based evidence for the presence and migration of chemicals from food contact materials. And this is called the FCC MIGEX. This is also freely available on our website. So, now that we did these two exercises, the intentionally used chemicals and the non-intentionally added substances, how many food contact chemicals do we know of? And we call this the universe of known food contact chemicals is about 16,000 chemicals right now. And it's growing because luckily we've got more and more people like Selina and others working on non-targeted studies, trying to identify whatever those aromatic amines are and so on. So it's growing. We have evidence for at least 1,800 chemicals that they migrate from food contact articles into food. That's quite a big number. So it's highly probable that we are exposed at some level to these chemicals. But what's even more concerning, when you talk about experts who know the complexity of the food contact materials, of plastics, of these coatings and so on, experts estimate that there can be up to 100,000 chemicals that may be migrating. So a large part of these are NIAS, and no one really knows what we're dealing with here. No information on toxicity, no information about mixture toxicity, because of course the chemicals don't migrate one by one. So that's a big number, and you have to start somewhere, right? So we said, let's look at the really innovative European chemical strategy for sustainability. Does anyone know about this? Have you seen this? No? It was published 3 years ago by the European Commission. And this is really addressing the issue of chemicals management, and that chemicals management isn't working. And you remember the graph that I showed you of the chronic diseases increasing in people. We need to improve the way we manage chemicals in Europe. And so we thought, okay, let's take the chemical strategy for sustainability of the European Commission and see which are the food contact chemicals of highest concern. So the ones that, according to this chemical strategy, because they're endocrine disruptors, they're carcinogens, they're persistent in the environment and so on, that should not be used anymore. And this is work by my colleague Lisa Zimmermann. Unfortunately couldn't be here today. She analyzed this. She came up with 388 different chemicals of high priority that are legally used right now to make food contact materials, and that should actually be banned if the chemical strategy was properly implemented. I think what's important here is that at least 127 of these high priority chemicals have evidence for migration, and there are many monomers on that list. I think at least 20 monomers. So what we often hear is, oh yeah, monomers react and they don't migrate. There's no human exposure to monomers. That isn't based on the evidence, that claim. So I think it's important to state clearly, it's wrong to assume that low levels are automatically safe levels. If you remember the safety definition, that the materials and articles should not transfer their constituents in quantities that could endanger human health. Because we know that there are chemicals for which there are no thresholds, like endocrine disruptors, like carcinogens. They are migrating, unfortunately. We know that they migrate as mixtures. And also for, children, developing children, I think it's wrong to apply the same kind of thresholds as we apply for adults. So I see a lot of long faces in the audience. It's a bit depressing, eh? I'm sorry about that. I'm just sharing the facts. There's a highlight to share. And this highlight is a recent scientific opinion from the European Food Safety Authority that after a long and painful debate about a chemical called bisphenol A, which I'm sure you've all heard of. It's a high production volume chemical, very widely used in the past in food packaging, unfortunately still getting used. This scientific opinion lowered the threshold, the safe, tolerable daily intake level by a factor of 20,000. Factor of 20,000. And that was really, I think, a breakthrough for science, because finally this authority is acknowledging that BPA is an endocrine disruptor, that it severely interferes with the immune system, in this case, the reason for this decision, but there's also many, many other effects as endocrine disruptors have. And now the European Commission is scrambling to implement this. I'm a bit pessimistic now again. I don't think we will see big dramatic changes, at least not in the near future, but it's a signal. It's a really important signal. And I think we can use this to push for more really necessary changes. Why do we need more changes? Well, if you think of chemicals in food and the attention that, for example, pesticides like DEET and so on get, and you compare that to the attention that food contact chemicals get, there's way too little focus on food contact chemicals. I think it works. So you see, if you look at the pesticides, we're talking about maybe 1,500 substances here, so it's a fairly well-characterized chemistry. The level of contamination in food is in the ppb range, and there's very thorough toxicological evaluation. When it comes to food contact chemicals, we've got this number of 100,000, give or take a few 10,000, but the levels are really high. By law, you can have migration of up to 60 milligram per kilogram food from food contact materials. And there's very little knowledge on the chemical impact. So I think this is also really important to put that in perspective. Finally, this is, I should have put a QR code on this. I've been seeing you taking notes actively. I like that. But you can find it if you just put in the title. This is a paper that we put out 3 years ago on the impacts of food contact chemicals on human health. It's a scientific paper, but it's mostly intended for non-academics, I would say. It's really focusing on policymakers and also people who are working on finding solutions to our planetary crises. Oftentimes, we hear that we have to make food packaging lighter so that we use less carbon when we transport it from Chile to France and from France to Chile and so on. And I think this focus on single issues like just on climate change or just on chemicals, as a matter of fact, is really the problem. We need to integrate all of the knowledge we have, and we need to try and work on new approaches, how we produce food, how we consume food, how we package that food, how it's sold, what the business models are, and so on. Because what we're doing right now isn't working, and it needs to work because these are the people that we are responsible for. So I think we do need to do a better job, and I think doing a better job starts with acknowledging the scientific facts. So with that, I would like to thank you. Oopsa. The smart way forward. Maybe that would be a good slide to end on, yeah. So remove the most hazardous chemicals, properly test the finished food contact materials. We didn't get into that now. Redesign food production, food consumption, and yeah, systemically address plastic pollution. Don't just look at it end of pipe, don't just deal with the waste, but look at, you know, the reason why we have the waste and then tackle that. So you can get all the information I shared freely on our website. We also have a workshop next week, which takes place in Zurich. So if you're spontaneous, please join us in person or join online. You can still register for that. And with that, I would like to, last but not least, send a huge shout out to all the many collaborators and the fantastic scientists that I have the privilege of working with, my team, colleagues, and board members, and so on. And thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Is there any question? Okay.
Okay, just a small one. Why monomers and catalysts are in the part of intentionally used chemicals? Because they are, for me, they are not intentionally used. They are residuals. Which ones were that? Monomers and catalysts.
Yes. So you can call them residuals. They are intentionally used to make polymers. And then the polymers have the function.
They are not supposed to be there at the
They're
end.
not supposed to be there, but they are there and they migrate. So yeah.
It's like impurities. They are not supposed to be there, but they are there.
Excuse me?
It's like impurities.
Yeah, but they're not impurities because they're intentionally used. So you start, it's like a cooking recipe, right? If you make a cake, you use flour usually, and so you don't want flour.
It's a part of the formulation.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
You know you put it in, so it's something that you know could be in. It doesn't have to be there at the end, but it could be there. It's really, I don't know, for me to see that we can use CMRs, or carcinogenic compounds, mutagenic compounds, and they are in the list of things that we can use. There's something wrong there, no?
Yeah, I agree.
Because when you look at all these food chemicals that are on the, I don't know if there is a white list, but it's strange that we can use some CMRs to make some food contact materials. Yes.
And what about biodegradable stuff? Because of the biodegradable plastics, did you detect new additives? Because we need maybe new additives to have the same chemical, not chemical, but physical properties.
So the question was biodegradable plastics, whether they contain novel additives. So now I really wish that my colleague Lisa Zimmermann were here, because that's her area of expertise. We saw the study on these biodegradable plastic bottles. I think it could make sense that biocides are used in biodegradable plastics for food packaging, because the function of food packaging is to preserve the food, so you don't want a material that spontaneously biodegrades. bio-based. Okay. Yeah, like PLA, for example, and so on. Well, I don't know exactly what the additives are that are used, but if you look at toxicity of everything, like the whole mixture of chemicals that comes out, you see no difference to conventional plastics. So in terms of toxicity, it's not better. Yeah.
Just a comment. You have the positive list, which is the same for traditional and bio-based material. So we have exactly the same list, but it's a positive list. So with some restrictions. Maybe. I have just a comment because you spoke about biodegradable packaging material from polyethylene, and it was the starting point of your presentation, but I think it's not really biodegradable. It's bio-based because you can create polyethylene from ethanol, but in the end you have exactly the same polymer. It's not biodegradable. It can't be. So if you maybe, so this material are really, for me, exactly the same than traditional materials, but I agree with you, there is maybe a problem with the chemicals and much more the dyes, of course.
I agree with you that it's not biodegradable, but the bottles are called biodegradable plastic bottles. The producer is saying they will be degraded into humus, gas, and water.
Je me permets de dire en français, parce qu'en anglais, je ne vais pas y arriver. Les études de Lisa Zimmerman expliquaient, comme le disait Jane Muncke, les mêmes toxicités entre les plastiques biosourcés et les plastiques pétrosourcés. Et une autre question se pose aujourd'hui. Je suis allée à un colloque d'allergologues récemment. En fait, les plastiques biosourcés posent un problème potentiel justement d'allergie parce qu'ils sont constitués de végétaux. Et aujourd'hui, on est en train de découvrir des nouvelles allergies liées potentiellement à ces nouveaux plastiques biosourcés et qui commencent à émerger et qui commencent aussi à poser problème au-delà des migrations, etc.
Yes, it's true. I think that's a really important point because if it's bio-based material, you can have proteins and things that can have allergenic potential. I think another issue with the bio-based plastics is it matters how the raw materials are produced, and if you have industrial agriculture to produce crops which you then turn into plastics, you have a lot of environmental impacts related to producing that feedstock. There's other ways of producing bio-based material where you use secondary biomass or waste, for example. But again, you need to always pay attention to the protein content, for example, and allergenic potential. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Cocktails?
No, not yet. We have two more talks. So one that was on the program and another one that is short one. En français, j'imagine. Donc, one about mosquitoes. Merci, Jane.